I think we are going to start because we have, back-to-back talks tonight. Look at all of you. I will take my mask off, but I am socially distanced from you. But we are getting close to optional masks, I think, within the city of Columbus, probably here in the next week. I'm Nanette Macy-Jones, the executive director, and I think I know almost there must be somebody that doesn't never talk to me before, but this is a joyous evening in many ways because this is the largest gathering in the museum family, perhaps with the exception of art celebration last fall. We did try to do that in person, but we kept the numbers down. So I think there's more of us here today than there have been since the beginning of COVID. Though may I tell you that the attendance for Van Gogh was extraordinary. We were just a few people shy of 45,000 people went through that show, which is an amazing number. We have never, ever beaten the monthly gross sales in the store since December of 2015, and we did it 3 months in a row, which was very exciting. Yeah, it was nice. And I got interviewed by the Wall Street Journal about whether I liked Immersive Van Gogh. Actually, my friends at Immersive Van Gogh was good to us because everybody was talking about Van Gogh. So it is a really joyous evening, and we'll have back-to-back presentations about the two wonderful shows that we have downstairs. And I'm going to warn you now, we had separate RSVPs. So some of you RSVP'd for both talks. Some of you only RSVP'd for one talk. And I asked, and there are people who are coming just to the second talk. So I want to ask you all to be, this is like Scout's honor here, that if you did not sign up for the second, please at the end of the Lichtenstein talk, go out and go see the shows. That way those who are coming in can fill in the seats, and we'll have a little switchover. But before, Nick, could you do my slide? I do think, though, in the middle of the joy of being here this evening, I think we should stop for a somber moment to remember the people of the Ukraine. This is a moment when your museum, our museum, realizes how deeply embedded, how much a part of a global art world that we are. There's been several times this week when there's so much going on that I started to complain about some aggravating little thing. And I stopped because I realized how fortunate we are that our museum is not in a war zone and we are not in the path of an invading army. Our colleagues in the Ukraine are. Directors and curators at museums have a very special task. They have that we entrust them with. If you work in an office building in the middle of a crisis, in the middle of a trauma like war, you simply close your office door and hope your tower is there when you come back. Curators and directors do not do that. They need to take care of their families, their colleagues, their neighbors, but they also have to take care of the objects that are entrusted to them. And they are desperately in the Ukraine. I mean, people will say it's easy, just, put it, take it out of harm's way. That's not easy to do. So they are desperately trying to protect precious works of art that have lived in the Ukraine for centuries, often for centuries. During times like this, you pray that international laws that we have passed to protect and spare arts and cultural objects during times of war will hold. In truth, they rarely do, partially because eliminating someone's art heritage and their culture heritage is another way, either passively or actively, of destroying a country's and a society's memory of themselves. It erases their memory. So that's why these objects are so very important to all of us. Already this week, a small museum in Ivankov, I'm going to screw this up, Ivankov, in about 50 miles out of Kiev, burned to the ground. It was one of its treasures was the large group of works by Maria Primachenko, who is one of the most beloved folk artists. She is actually the most beloved folk artist of the Ukraine. 25 works of hers perished in this fire. And so already we're seeing the devastation that the arts will suffer. The other thing I wanted to mention was that this week, 17,000 Russian artists and art professionals signed a protest letter about the invasion of the Ukraine. I'm sure everyone in this room has signed a protest letter during their life. We do that ubiquitously in our country, and we hope people listen to us. I remind us all that in the Russia of today, to sign such a letter, each one of those individuals put their life and their livelihood and their life at risk for standing up against the invasion of the Ukraine. So I think we should all be thinking of them this evening. The arts have given us so much respite during COVID, places that we can find comfort. And the other thing the arts don't do for us is the arts give us courage to stand up against wrongs, to stand up for others, and to stand up for what's right. So I think I ask you all to take a moment of silence for the Ukraine. Thank you. And now we can, again, perhaps move back to a celebratory mode. That's hard to do, I know, but I think it's really, again, I'm grateful for this museum and these wonderful 2 shows and all the work that's gone into them. And I'm going to now introduce my colleague, our acting chief curator and Pizzuti family curator of contemporary art, Tyler Can, who is going to introduce the first program of the evening. Tyler.
Thank you so much. Actually, could we have the first slide up as well? What a pleasure. I might invite you both to come up to the stage if you like. While I say that the Roy Lichtenstein History in the Making 1948 to 1960 exhibition is co-organized by the Colby College Museum of Art in Waterville, Maine, and the Nasher Museum of Art at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina. The exhibition is co-curated by Elizabeth Finch, who joins us here, as well. Beth is the Lunder Chief Curator at the Colby Museum. It's also curated by Marshall Price, who is Chief Curator, and Nancy A. Nasher and David J. Hennesegger, Curator of Modern Contemporary Art at the Nasher. I had to definitely write that title down. So I am so glad that Beth at least has been able to join us this evening. Marshall sends his regrets and regards. Beth is here in conversation with Columbus's own Jody Patterson, who is Associate Professor and Roy Lichtenstein Foundation Chair of Art History at Ohio State University, sorry, the Ohio State University. Jody's work focuses on American art and culture in the mid-20th century, looking especially at relations between art and politics, international modernism, and public art as a context. So her book, Modernism for the Masses, published by Yale University Press, is a really beautiful volume and an important take on the art of this period. So I should mention that support for this exhibition and its national tour is provided by the Roy Lichtenstein Foundation. The foundation has been a critical supporter of this museum, most recently by endowing the Roy Lichtenstein Foundation Curatorial Fellowship for Diversity in the Arts. This project, the exhibition, is also supported in part by the National Endowment for the Arts, and additional catalog support is provided by the Wyeth Foundation of American Art. And the catalog is really beautiful, by the way. You can see the cover on the screens around. And I also have to tell you that it is 20% off for members tonight in the shop downstairs. So pick up your copy. So when the curators of the exhibition decided upon the subtitle History in the Making, I have no doubt they were thinking about the significance of Lichtenstein's work in this period as it looks toward perhaps better known work, the kind of really groundbreaking adoption, absorption, appropriation of comic book imagery, the sort of pop era that it is best known for. I mean, that would really go on to define the trajectory of the history of art in the 20th century. The work here on display is an important prologue to that. And both Columbus and Cleveland, Ohio loom large in this story. It's unquestionable from our point of view that the project had to be shown here. And I'm really gratified that this was kind of an intention of the outset of the project on your side. So yeah, this is just a really happy marriage, and we're really pleased to have the exhibition here. So let me thank, maybe along with Nanette, Nicole Romy, Greg Jones, David Holm, Cameron Sharp and their teams, and our curatorial and exhibitions teams, along with our new addition, Scott Gallagher, as graphic designer. So there is no history without its making. I mean, that's true of art. It's true of exhibitions as well. The work here hasn't really ever been seen together. Roy Lichtenstein never saw this work all together, I'm sure. So, I mean, it's just to say that, this exhibition is really also a work of making history. And it's a history of this place, and for that we are doubly grateful. So without further ado, I'll leave it to you, Jody and Beth. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyler. Okay, so the mics are on. Yeah,
They just are on. Okay.
okay. It is a great pleasure to be here, and having the title of Roy Lichtenstein Foundation Chair in History of Art at The Ohio State University is a great honor. And certainly I have long been a fan of Lichtenstein. I have shared this anecdote with colleagues in the History of Art department. One of my favorite works to teach, I lived and worked abroad for some time, was Lichtenstein's very well-known Wham! In Tate Modern, one of his sort of classic pop art works. And then just having had the chance to peruse the galleries this afternoon, I want to congratulate Beth and Marshall, who's not here. This show is truly revelatory. To see the ways in which Lichtenstein was dipping into so many pots and so gifted across so many styles and vocabularies, and his knowledge of the history of art, it's a real joy to see the show. So many congratulations.
Thank you.
And let's see if I can also move a slide forward. There we go. Okay, too many slides. Okay. So the first image that we're looking at here, Look Mickey, from 1961, obviously postdates the period that we're looking at in the exhibition. I wonder if you might say something about the Lichtenstein that is perhaps a little bit more familiar to us.
Right. I mean, this is often cited as the first pop painting. And of course, as the joke goes, that Lichtenstein did in fact hook a really big one when he started looking at American comics. So it's a perfect origin story, but it wasn't actually the truth. As really good stories sometimes are, have a little bit more complex thought in them than that. But this in particular was, what we wanted to show through this exhibition was how we got to this, and also really what came before, which is 2 decades of an artist working quite carefully to craft a career, to understand what kind of contribution he could make. And much of that happened right here in Ohio. So we were really excited to have this exhibition come here, and also to see it so beautifully installed by Tyler. So I want to thank you for that and acknowledge that. It's just beautifully, it just sings in the galleries here. So we're really excited to see it. But so, the dramatic difference between this painting and what you might see earlier in Lichtenstein's work is what we wanted to understand. And we also wanted to understand why there are so many of these works, because the Lichtenstein Foundation found hundreds of them. So once we were able to begin doing the research, we understood that there was a lot there and also a lot to understand, and ways that it could inform how we understand the rootedness of pop art in the history of American art, in the history of even Western expansion, which you might not think of when you look at American comics, and also the history even of the Midwest. So there was a lot to uncover, and one of the things we were excited to do was to bring this forward and to understand, really the roots of pop art through these works.
So this particular painting is where the show basically ends. So now we're going to move backward and look at some of the myths and inspirations around Lichtenstein's early work. Okay, so this one we might notice is in the collection of the Colby College Museum of Art, where you have come from just yesterday, 1951, The Cowboy. I wonder if you might say something about if and how this served as an inspiration or a jump-off point.
Yeah, I mean, this was really when I arrived at the Colby Museum. This is a long time ago in 2008. This painting was on view in our galleries, and I was walking through the galleries trying to understand the collection better. And this particular work really stopped me in my tracks because I didn't know who it was by. And then I found it really did reward close looking, that you can read this, the 10-gallon hat and the lasso and the chaps that are there that look a little like bent nails, and the plaid shirt. Like, there's a lot of detail, even though it had this very kind of intentionally naive style. So it was something I just wanted to understand better. And that's when that was really the seed of this particular project.
And it turns out it wasn't a one-off.
Right. I mean, that was so exciting when we began to do research on this for this exhibition and saw that there was this preparatory drawing that was actually larger than the painting. And you can see both of these works in the exhibition. Actually, we don't know whether it could have, this drawing could have happened after the painting happened. We don't actually know, but it's lovely to see these two brought together. And I think one of the things about this exhibition, and Tyler mentioned that, is that it's bringing together works that have never been seen all together before, and bringing out works from, in many cases, quite, collections, private collections, where they were passed down from a friend of Roy Lichtenstein to that friend's children. So the kind of the relationships and the sense of friendship extending from Roy Lichtenstein's early years to this present moment, and held, with care in these families all these years. Very different than you might see, another Lichtenstein collector, like major collectors. These are, a few cherished objects in various families' collections.
And I believe the Lichtenstein Foundation was quite interested in aiding and abetting this project in terms of finding all of these works in the various homes where they ended up. And I also, this is an anecdote again, whether it's myth or not, that Lichtenstein had made a drawing and given it to someone during his younger years and said, "Hang on to this. I'm going to be famous someday." Turns out he was.
Yes, that's the Paul Bunyan drawing that you'll see. Actually, it was Lichtenstein gave it to, as the daughter of this friend tells the story, he gave it to that friend as payment for a debt. And they were roommates at OSU.
Did he hang on to the drawing?
He did indeed hang on to it.
Okay.
He did.
Okay.
Yes.
So while this is the most comprehensive and perhaps complete constellation of Lichtenstein's early works, there were earlier projects, and one of which we're looking at here on the Lichtenstein in the relation with the American Indian imagery.
Right. So this particular exhibition happened in 2005, and it looked at not just this early period, but also later. So starting around 1951 to about 1956, Lichtenstein looked at a series of works, or worked on a series of works related to Native American imagery, and then picked up that imagery again in 1979. So this crossed the whole span of his career. But I think this particular exhibition created the illusion that all of his early works were related to this specific series. So one of the things that we were excited to do with this particular exhibition is to show the tremendous diversity of styles and subjects of Lichtenstein's work in this early period. There were other exhibitions. So the early works began to filter in to some of the retrospectives that have happened, but never in this kind of depth, and never kind of bringing them all together with multiple lenders to the exhibition.
Oh, okay. So pilot, circa 1948, we are getting close to Ohio, I believe, and some of the other subject matter that Lichtenstein was exploring and making work with. I don't know if you have particular things that you might want to say about this painting.
Sure. So Lichtenstein was born in 1923 and raised born in New York City, raised in New York City, chose to go to the Ohio State University in 1940. He did that. It was kind of a compromise with his parents. He knew he wanted to be an artist from a very early age, from a teenager really, and he'd been taking art classes in various places in New York City, but his parents wanted him to get a degree. And so he could do so at the Ohio State University. He could do that and study art. He was also interested in seeing other places. So off he went to Ohio in 1940. In 1943, he was drafted. He served in World War II. He came back and finished his undergraduate degree and stayed on for his master's. And it was during that time that he created this work. It's a wonderful pastel, and this is a number of these pastels are in the exhibition. This is a medium he didn't really return to later in his career. So they are curious and quite magical works, I think. They also show aspects of some of the kind of segmented overall sense that you see in the later pop works, although they're also quite different. But some of the subject matter has a kind of popular sense of, things out in the world, objects, certainly also processing perhaps his own experience as a veteran. So this was the starting place. Marshall and I really thought about, when does this exhibition start? Does it start earlier? Because there certainly are works that are earlier that he was making as an undergraduate. But this particular work and others were in his thesis show at for his master's. And so this was really the starting place for the exhibition for us. And then, as we mentioned, 1960 being the end point before he became a kind of household name with pop art. And then this is Lichtenstein in circa 1947, so around the time he would have been a master's student. This photograph kind of says it all. A lot of, an electric artist, and a kind of an idea man, and very much someone of the mid-20th century there with his gigantic car.
A subject that came up in much pop art as well.
Yes.
Self-fashioning. So Lichtenstein, the artist, again, we sort of conventionally think about Lichtenstein in terms of the pop artist, but we see some really interesting kinds of representations happening in this early work.
Yeah, I mean, these two works, it's kind of hard to believe that they were made around the same moment. This was actually after Lichtenstein had moved to Cleveland. He had married, and he didn't get tenure. He had, after his master's, he started to teach at Ohio State, and he didn't get tenure. So I don't know how history would have gone had he stayed. I don't know. We'll never know. But he left Columbus and moved to Cleveland, and worked there for another 6 or 7 years, until he moved east for another teaching position. But he was really not teaching in Cleveland. He was making art. You know, some of the things we looked at, or he was looking at, was medieval art. He was quite interested in the Bayeux Tapestry as a source. And I think perhaps interested in some of the kind of medievalizing, relatively, 19th century buildings, for instance, the old OSU armory that was taken down in 1959 and eventually became the site of the Wexner Center, the Wexner Museum right here in Columbus. But seeing some of these, Lichtenstein had a very good eye for things that needed a little satire. And so here too, he is as a kind of jousting knight, a self-portrait in this very naive style. And then very purposefully, as one of his friends called it, his Renaissance portrait, the work on the right, self-portrait at an easel. At this point, Lichtenstein had actually invented his own easel that he used all the way through his career, that allowed him to turn his canvas around and see it at different angles to get a sense of the totalness of the image. But in this case, he was very purposefully presenting himself as an artist at an old-fashioned easel. So this, thinking about, what image he wants to project as an artist, and crafting his self-image as an artist was very much on his mind in works like this.
And I think we see a lot of that playfulness coming through.
Yes, absolutely. So Lichtenstein often mentioned his experience of being a student of Hoyt Sherman. Hoyt Sherman was trained as an engineer and then ended up teaching art. He had these fascinating ideas around the flash lab. So he liked to place his students in complete darkness. First, allow them to see an image, something that they were going to draw briefly, plunge them into darkness, and then they drew in darkness. And the idea behind that was to get around any of their kind of preconceived ideas and to work with a kind of visual totality. So it was a reworking of Gestalt psychology. And I just had to show this image of Hoyt Sherman working with a football player at OSU with an early version. First, he created these contraptions where the shade would come down, and later he invented something where the whole room would go dark. But I guess he thought, it would add to the totalizing vision for the quarterback if they somehow worked this magic. So it had to be shown, this image.
Perhaps we'll see a revisiting of this technique now in the next
Yes.
Buckeye season.
And then, important to me in this research, because Hoyt Sherman, Lichtenstein often mentioned what an important influence he was to him. And yet there's also the air we breathe, right? And so I was really interested in my research to think about, what was the environment that Lichtenstein was returning to after the war. He had just married. His sons were born during this period, and his wife Isabel Lichtenstein, who is actually in the image on the left, all the way in the back with this kind of scarf in front. She was working at the 1030 gallery, and one of the wonderful stories that came out of this was Isabel's story, and also her friend Algiza Osicki. So Joseph Osicki was a very good friend of Roy Lichtenstein's. I'm guessing there are people in the audience who know all this better than I do even. But these amazing, this vibrancy of the culture, in this case in Cleveland, working with, you know, a place like the Downtown Gallery, Edith Halpert in New York. This story of modernism in Ohio was very much part of the picture for us.
Midwestern modernism.
Midwestern modernism. And and then there are these interesting differences. So, so we have woman knitting here. This kind of a subject was not something that Lichtenstein did later as a pop artist. You see his girls that are, you know, roughly at the same time that he was painting fighter pilots. But he began to be quite interested in looking at American subjects, and in this case, women knitting, the kind of genre scenes that you might see in 19th century American painting, but here kind of transformed in a sort of robot form, as if she could rock side to side, very flat, right?
And we can see, I think, some of the early influences in these works, maybe a bit of Picasso and Paul Klee,
Absolutely.
all of the various things that he would have been
Yes.
looking at.
Right.
I love this. There are two versions of the Washington crossing the Delaware in the galleries downstairs. Of course, the famous Leutze, but again, American subjects.
Yes, and so looking at anything that might be ripe for satire. So the famous Emanuel Leutze painting from 1851. Lichtenstein would have known it at the Metropolitan Museum, where it's almost, I've never seen it off view.
And it's about as big as this screen.
It is. It's 21 feet wide, 12 feet tall. It's gigantic. It plays a lot with factual history to create a very, very grand narrative. So Lichtenstein wasn't the only artist who was interested. Larry Rivers, Alex Katz, Marisol, they were all, you know, tilting their their swords at this particular painting, and in this case creating a very childlike version of it, definitely not interested in 21 feet wide kind of image, and then creating these kind of the boat with a sort of insect-like objects. And then we loved as well that the king on the right, so this overlap between the medievalizing imagery and this king-like hat on Washington. So the ways that different series in these early works overlapped in this kind of visual iconography that Lichtenstein was playing when he thought about images of power and what created this sort of mythic sense of a history, and how might he play with that?
Very much going against the grain of contemporary 1950s ideas of American masculinity.
Yes.
And some of the things that would have been more recognizable imagery from this period, and turning these figures into decorative stick figures is quite interesting. Okay, some other works that I had never imagined that I would see coming from Lichtenstein: industry, machines, all treated in an almost kind of approaching abstract idiom. What were your sort of insights when you discovered these works?
Well, there are not that many of them, and they do look at different subject matter, verging towards abstraction. So in 54, artists did need to ask themselves, you know, how do I engage or not this thing called abstract expressionism? At the time, Lichtenstein had a gig painting dials at a company in Cleveland. And so some of these objects came from that. They may have also come from an engineering book that he used, that actually Hoyt Sherman did some of the drawings for. But I think of them as, you know, he was often looking for ways, almost like a mechanism for painting. And these were the objects where the mechanisms came in. They didn't have an exactitude. They had a kind of purposefully goofy, as if self-taught. I mean, it's so interesting. He was so trained as an artist and chose to paint in this style. So tremendous energy and a kind of playfulness and also a searchingness. I think he really was searching at this point.
And I think too, in terms of some of the main paradigms coming out of New York school formalism, we do see the flatness, and we do see the interest in a kind of push and pull and pattern and large sort of patches of just pure color paint. So we can see some of the places that he's going to go, I think, if we look back. Money.
Money. What a better thing to print, right? That was one of his quips. I'm paraphrasing, but this is, one of the joys of this exhibition is are the prints in it. He was early adopter of printmaking, printed in lots of different techniques. You'll see lithography, etching, woodblock printing. In fact, the exhibition has 2 actual wood blocks in it. So in tremendous inventiveness and kind of fearlessness, I think, as a printmaker, but also play, right? So here you see almost a comic book character emerging from this $10 bill, and looking at the history of trompe-l'oeil painting, so hyper-realistic painting from the 19th century. And one of those subjects, a favorite subject, was, can I paint currency that seems so real? It's as if you could peel it right off the canvas. He's not interested in that in this case, right? It's still playing with abstraction, but creating this kind of beaky looking George Hamilton here, and this playfulness, and of course the sense that you might be able to, that there's currency and this sort of visual, this ready imagery that can be picked up and pulled into his art.
Familiarity, things literally in circulation that everyone's familiar with, and then transposing and translating with his practice. Okay. So we're getting back to some familiar terrain here. I believe Mickey Mouse is rearing his head. And in fact, before you might have a few comments, I was very distressed to read in the panels in the exhibition spaces that he used some of these works as drop claws subsequently to this particular moment in time. So it's great that some are still available.
Yeah, we were also waiting to find, under some of the abstractions, are there early pop works underneath some of those? So we eventually actually X-rayed a work to understand better, and did not find, Mickey waiting there under that abstraction. But it's an interesting moment. So in 1957, Lichtenstein and his family moved back east, first at a state university in New York, and then to Douglas College, which is then part of Rutgers University, the women's college at Rutgers University. And he began to work in abstraction, but he was also making these drawings. And there's a story around the artist Alan Capro, who was teaching there and is important for the history, other aspects of this movement called Fluxus. But there's this anecdote that there was some bubble gum that was wrapped, as we know, in those kind of primary colors. And Alan Capro said, this is what art is about. And Lichtenstein says, let me show you something. And so he took him into a studio, and there was the pop painting. And that was this wonderful beginnings, one of these sort of various origin stories around pop art. But even earlier than that, Lichtenstein was making these drawings around the time of that lithograph we were looking at in 57, 58, these drawings of Mickey. In this case, we ended up we wanted here in this image to sort of show the connection between that emerging abstraction and this pop art. So we think of these moments as quite distinct, but they're more fluid, right? Hand painted pop was a wonderful exhibition years ago at the Whitney Museum that shows that to be this fluid moment, that these boundaries we sometimes create between art movements are more porous than that. And that's absolutely true here.
And I think if we look at the dates, we can see that he was straddling these dichotomies between figuration and abstraction. And again, a kind of poking fun or a satire if we look at the method that Lichtenstein is using to create some of the abstractions. And there's one from 1960, which is exactly where the exhibition is going to draw itself to a conclusion. And I don't know if you have any final thoughts about the simultaneous existence of these very, very different vocabularies.
Yeah, they do seem quite different. And yet they're in dialogue. So Lichtenstein invented a way to create abstract paintings that were sort of literally at a hand's distance. So he would take rags and he would add ribbons of paint to them, so colors, right? And then he would drag them. So to create, you can see him, yeah, doing that there. So we think of abstract expressionism as this, channeling of the soul. He, I think was not going to go there with that. He wanted to create almost related to that way he was creating, what's a mechanism for painting? Is it a moment in American history, art history? Is it the $10 bill, or is it dragging creating in a sense a technology for painting in this instance? So in these, and it's both, right? It's both and these paintings are wonderfully lyrical, and the abstractions, they are both. But they were a moment, they were a couple years, and at most, and then 1961 happened. But it didn't just happen. It had a prehistory. And that's what we are sharing here with this exhibition.
I would like to thank you for introducing me and everyone here to a new Lichtenstein, and to thank you and Marshall and the Lichtenstein Foundation for all of the labor and all of the thought and the time and attention to bringing us this much fuller picture. And I think having seen this show just gives you or gives us a whole different take on Lichtenstein, the pop artist. So so thank you. It's a really revelatory show.
Thank you so much, Charity. I will say, as someone who works at a teaching museum, I was thrilled to hear you're bringing your class here and that it will be a resource for you. So thank you.
Yes. Midwestern modernism.
Absolutely.
It's the new place we're going. Watch this space. I'm trying to find Tyler or Nanette to see if we want to move on to the next. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.